My father demanded I cancel my wedding to fund my brother's delusions. So I foreclosed on their house. The scent I associate with true happiness is a mix of freshly brewed coffee and the crisp, vanilla-like smell of expensive paper stock. It was the scent of our small apartment that one Saturday in April, when the afternoon sun slanted through the windows and illuminated the dust motes dancing in the air like tiny, golden sprites. My fiancé, James, was sitting across from me at our dining table, a man whose calm presence had become the anchor of my life. Between us lay the evidence of our future, swatches of fabric in shades of cream and sage green, and a single, perfect wedding invitation prototype resting on a piece of slate gray card. "I think this is it," I said, tracing the elegant, simple font with my fingertip. "Amelia and James." It looked so solid, so real. James reached across the table and covered my hand with his. His hands were warm and strong, the hands of a journalist, always ready to capture a story. But with me, they were just safe. "It's perfect," he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "We're perfect." I leaned back in my chair, a genuine, unburdened smile spreading across my face. For the first time in my 32 years, I felt like I was the sole architect of my own life, building something that was ours and ours alone. Our wedding wasn't going to be a grand affair. There would be no ice sculptures, no five-course meal that cost more than our car. It was to be a small, intimate ceremony at a restored historic inn, paid for with our own hard-earned money. It wasn't for show, it was for us. That thought, as pure as it was, brought with it a familiar, unwelcome guest, a tiny, gnawing whisper of guilt. I hadn't involved my family much in the planning. I told myself it was because we wanted it to be a surprise, but the truth was more complicated. My family, my father, Richard, my mother, Sarah, and my younger brother, Leo, operated on a different frequency, one tuned to the key of appearances and expectations. My small, heartfelt wedding would seem like a failure in their eyes. The guilt was a conditioned response, a muscle I'd been trained to flex my entire life. I pushed it down and took a sip of my coffee. The following Tuesday, my phone rang. It was my mother. Her voice was bright, a little too bright, a telltale sign that she was about to ask for something. "Amy, honey, how's the planning for the big day going?" she chirped. "It's going well, Mom. We've almost finalized everything." "Oh, wonderful. I was just telling Barbara from next door how creative you are. Speaking of creativity, you won't believe the latest news about Leo." I braced myself. Leo's news was a frequent topic. At 27, 5 years my junior, he was a perpetual fountain of brilliant ideas that never quite materialized. "He's launching a business, a real one this time," she gushed. "It's a subscription box service, but very high-end, curated lifestyle products for the modern gentleman. He's calling it Apex Living. Isn't that clever?" "It sounds ambitious," I said carefully. "It is. He's just short on some of the initial capital for inventory. Your father and I have helped as much as we can, but things are tight." There was a slight pause. "I was just thinking, honey, since you're so good with money, maybe you could help your brother out? Just a small loan to get him over the hump." The air in my lungs turned to ice. "Mom, I can't. Every single dollar we have is budgeted for the wedding. There's nothing left over." The warmth in her voice instantly cooled by 20 degrees. "Oh," she said. The word was small, but it carried the weight of 1,000 disappointments. "Of course. I understand. Your wedding is what's important right now." The passive aggression was a blade sliding between my ribs. After he hung up, I stood in my kitchen, gripping the edge of the counter. The request had triggered a memory I kept locked away, a memory that tasted like ash. 3 years ago, Leo's last brilliant idea, a foray into cryptocurrency, had imploded spectacularly, leaving my parents with a debt they couldn't handle. To cover it, they had secretly remortgaged the family home, the house I grew up in. A few months later, the calls from the bank started. I found a foreclosure notice accidentally left on the kitchen table during a Sunday visit. The shame on my father's face wasn't about the debt. It was about the potential for public humiliation. He was a man obsessed with his image as a successful patriarch. That night, I went home, liquidated a stock portfolio I'd been building since my first job, and anonymously set up a payment plan that funneled money directly to their mortgage lender every month. I never told them it was me. I couldn't bear their mixture of gratitude and humiliation. I just fixed the problem like I always did. My mother must have found out somehow, because a week later she hugged me, tears in her eyes, and whispered, "I'll never forget this, Amy." A promise that, it seemed, had an expiration date. For 3 years, a significant portion of my salary had vanished before I ever saw it, diverted to keep a roof over their heads. A roof they were now willing to leverage for their son's next fantasy. A few days later, a text from Leo lit up my phone. "Heard you told Mom you couldn't help. Guess some things are just more important. Hope the wedding is worth it." I showed it to James. He read it, his jaw tightening. "That is textbook manipulation, Amy. He's just stressed," I said, the excuse tasting like plastic on my tongue. "He's a 27-year-old man who has never had to face a single consequence," James countered, his voice gentle but firm. "You are not his safety net." His words planted a seed of doubt, a tiny crack in the dam of denial I had so carefully constructed. The final blow came that Friday. A call from my father. His voice was not pleading like my mother's. It was commanding, the voice he used when closing a deal. "Amelia, we're having a family dinner on Sunday. 7 o'clock. Be there. We need to discuss a family investment opportunity." It wasn't a request. It was a summons. "Dad, I'm really busy with this is important," he cut me off. "We need everyone to be looking at the bigger picture here." The bigger picture. His favorite phrase. It always meant the picture where I was smaller, and his and Leo's needs were bigger. My heart sank. This wasn't a discussion. It was an ambush. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this dinner would change everything. Walking into my parents' house on Sunday was like stepping onto a stage set for a play I didn't want to be in. The air was thick with the smell of my mother's roast beef, a scent usually reserved for holidays and what she called important family talks. It was the smell of obligation. My father was in the living room, holding a glass of red wine like a prop, while Leo lounged on the sofa, scrolling on his phone, the picture of detached arrogance. The dinner conversation was a monologue delivered in 2 parts. My father spoke of legacy, of building something that lasts, his eyes pointedly on Leo. My mother chirped about Leo's business acumen, recounting an anecdote about how he'd negotiated a deal with a supplier that was so flimsy it was almost laughable. I watched Leo attempt to explain his business model, peppering his speech with buzzwords like synergy and disruption. He was animated, but when I asked a simple, practical question about his customer acquisition strategy, he faltered, his eyes darting to my father for help. Richard immediately changed the subject, smoothing over the crack in his son's facade. I ate my roast beef in silence, each bite feeling heavier than the last. This entire performance was for my benefit. It was the preamble to the execution. After the plates were cleared, Richard leaned back in his chair, placing his hands on the table as if opening a board meeting. "Amelia," he began, his voice dropping to a serious, paternal tone. "As you know, Leo is on the verge of a major breakthrough. Apex Living isn't just a company. It's an asset for this family's future. I've already told Mom I can't help financially," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. My father's smile was thin and without warmth. "We're past that. We're talking about a reallocation of resources. Your wedding, it's a lovely thought, but it's a party. A one-day expense that vanishes into thin air. Leo's business is an investment. It's tangible. It builds our family's name." I stared at him, my mind struggling to process the cold, transactional nature of his words. Leo finally looked up from his phone, a smirk playing on his lips. "It's not like James is going anywhere. You can get married whenever. It's just a piece of paper." The casual cruelty of his remark was like a slap. "My wedding," I said, my voice low, "is not a line of credit for you to draw from." The answer is no. My father leaned forward, his mask of paternal concern falling away to reveal the cold, hard steel beneath. "Do not be selfish, Amelia. Think about what this family has given you. Think about the bigger picture. You owe us this. You're going to postpone the wedding, and you're going to give that money to your brother. It's your duty." "I'm not postponing anything," I said, a strange, cold calm settling over me. Richard slammed his hand flat on the dining table, making the glasses jump. "You will do this," he roared, his face turning a blotchy red. "After everything we have done for you, this is how you repay us?" With ingratitude. In that moment, something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud, violent break, but a quiet, clean severance. I looked at their faces, illuminated by the cold light of the dining room chandelier. My father's righteous fury, my brother's smug entitlement, my mother's pleading, tear-filled eyes, begging me to just give in, to smooth things over, to be the good daughter she needed me to be. And the epiphany struck me with the force of a physical blow. They didn't see me. They didn't see Amelia, their daughter, their sister. They saw a resource, a tool, a safety net they felt entitled to use and discard as they pleased. The years of sacrifice, the quiet fixing, the secret, crushing weight of their mortgage that I carried on my shoulders, it wasn't to earn their love. It was just the price of admission to this toxic theater, and I was done paying it. I slowly placed my napkin on the table. "I understand now," I said, and my voice was completely devoid of emotion. It was the voice of a stranger. I stood up, pushed my chair in, and walked out of the dining room. My mother called my name, her voice cracking, but I didn't turn back. I walked out the front door, the door to the house I was paying for, and didn't look back. I got into my car and sat there for a long time, my hands gripping the steering wheel. The tears finally came, hot and furious. But it wasn't sadness I felt. It was rage, a lifetime of suppressed anger rising up like a tidal wave. And beneath the rage, something else, a terrifying, exhilarating sense of freedom. I didn't drive home. I drove to James's apartment. He opened the door, took one look at my face, and pulled me into his arms. I told him everything, the words tumbling out in a raw, broken torrent. When I finished, I pulled back, my voice trembling. "Maybe I should have just done it, James. Maybe I'm the one destroying everything. That's my family." The old programming was fighting back, the guilt tried to reclaim its territory. He held my face in his hands, his gaze firm and unwavering. "Listen to me," he said, his voice a low, steady anchor in my storm. "A family does not ask you to choose between your own happiness and their delusions. They didn't ask, Amy. They demanded. They don't see you as a daughter. They see you as a function. You're not destroying anything. You're just finally refusing to set yourself on fire to keep them warm." His words cut through the fog of guilt and obligation. He was right. He had been right all along. I wasn't the villain of this story. I was the prisoner, and I had just been handed the key. My resolve hardened, not into anger, but into a cold, clear purpose. I spent the night at his place, and the next morning, I didn't call my mother to apologize. I called a lawyer. My decision was made. It wasn't made in a fit of anger. It was made with the chilling clarity of a survivor. The lawyer's office was on the 14th floor of a downtown skyscraper, a world of cool glass and muted grays that felt a million miles away from my family's suffocating floral living room. Her name was Dana Albright. She was a woman in her late 40s with a sharp, tailored suit and an even sharper gaze that missed nothing. I had been referred to her by a colleague, who had described her as a shark in Chanel. I laid out the story for her, my voice even and methodical. I told her about Leo's endless failed ventures, my parents' enablement, and the pressure campaign. Then, I told her about the mortgage. I showed her the bank statements from the last 3 years, a neat, damning pile of evidence documenting the steady flow of my money into her parents' loan account. She listened without interruption, her fingers steepled under her chin. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment. A slow, dangerous smile spread across her face. "Ms. Peterson," she said, her voice a low purr, "you haven't just been helping out. You've paid more than 60% of the outstanding principal on this loan in the last 3 years. They have defaulted on their original terms multiple times, and your payments are the only reason the bank hasn't foreclosed." She leaned forward. "You are not a victim here. You're the primary creditor. You don't need to sue them for what they've put you through. You hold all the cards. You effectively own their house." The words hit me with the force of a physical shock. The action I had taken out of shame, The secret I had guarded to protect them was now my greatest source of power. It was a weapon I had unknowingly forged myself. "What can I do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Dana's smile widened. "The question is, what do you want to do?" She looked me straight in the eye. "But I will tell you this. Whatever path you choose, it is a one-way street. There is no going back to the way things were. Are you prepared for that?" I thought of James's words. I thought of my father's face, contorted with rage as he demanded my future. I thought of the years of walking on eggshells. I took a deep breath. "Yes," I said, "I am." In the weeks that followed, my family, expecting an apology, was met with a wall of silence. The escalation was predictable. My mother left tearful, manipulative voicemails. "I don't know who this cold person is you've become, Amelia. Your father is heartbroken." Leo sent me links to articles about narcissistic children. The real blow, the one that hit me like a punch to the gut, came from my father. He posted a photo of himself and Leo on Facebook, both of them beaming, arms slung around each other's shoulders. The caption read, "So proud of my son, who understands that family legacy is built on sacrifice, not selfish parties. Some children just forget where they came from." Underneath, a flood of comments from their friends and distant relatives poured in, offering sympathy and condemning the anonymous, ungrateful child. It was my rock bottom. I felt completely and utterly erased. That was when I knew I couldn't just walk away. I had to end it on my terms. My father, believing he had the upper hand, summoned me to a final intervention. This time, they had assembled reinforcements. Two of my uncles and my Aunt Carol, my father's younger sister, were seated in the living room when I arrived. The air was heavy with judgment. It was a tribunal. Richard began, his voice dripping with condescending pity. He spoke of my selfishness, my lack of gratitude, how I was being influenced by outsiders, a clear dig at James, and how I was tearing the family apart with my stubbornness. When he finished, a sanctimonious silence filled the room. Everyone looked at me, expecting contrition. I didn't offer any. I calmly reached into my tote bag and pulled out a sheaf of papers prepared by Dana. I placed them on a coffee table. "You're right, Dad," I said, my voice clear and steady. "It is about sacrifice and family assets, which is why I have some news about this particular asset." I gestured around the room. "As you know, the mortgage on this house is quite substantial, and for the last 3 years, I have been the one paying it." A ripple of confusion went through the room. My father's face went pale. "I've decided to stop," I continued. "Effective immediately. Dana, my lawyer, has already informed the bank. They will initiate foreclosure proceedings in 60 days. My mother gasped, a hand flying to her mouth. "Or," I said, letting my words hang in the air, "there's another option. You can sign the deed over to me, in lieu of foreclosure, to satisfy the massive debt you have defaulted on. The choice is yours. Public ruin or a quiet transfer." The room erupted. Richard shot to his feet, his face purple with rage. "You're lying. You ungrateful snake. How dare you use these filthy tricks against your own father?" Leo, ever the opportunist, turned to one of our uncles. "Uncle Robert, you see, this is what I'm up against. But my business, it's going to be huge. It could solve all of this if I just had a little capital." His pathetic sales pitch was drowned out by my mother's sobs as she pleaded with me. "Amelia, don't do this to us. What will the neighbors think? Please, honey, please." Another uncle tried to play peacemaker. Now, let's not get lawyers involved. This is a family matter." The chaos was a vortex of noise and anger. And then a quiet voice cut through it all. "She's not lying." All eyes turned to my Aunt Carol. She had been silent until now, a ghost in the corner of the room. She looked directly at my father, her brother, and her voice, though shaking, was resolute. "You did the same thing to me 20 years ago, Richard," she said, "with Mom and Dad's inheritance. You called it protecting the family name. You convinced me to sign my share over to you to cover one of your bad investments. You told me it was my duty." She turned her gaze to me. "I see you haven't changed. I'm so sorry it took me this long to say something." A profound, stunned silence fell over the room. Aunt Carol's words were the final, devastating blow. She hadn't just validated my story. She had exposed my father's entire life as a pattern of manipulation and predatory behavior. He stood there, exposed and defeated, not by a stranger, but by his own blood. The tribunal he had assembled to shame me had become the stage for his own public execution. The aftermath of the showdown was not loud, but a low, simmering hum of defeat. My father, stripped of his moral authority, was left with nothing but impotent rage. Facing the undeniable truth of Aunt Carol's testimony and the legal checkmate I had placed him in, there was nowhere left for him to run. Public foreclosure would mean the ultimate destruction of the image he had spent a lifetime curating. He had no choice. A week later, we met at Dana's office. The air was thick with resentment. My father sat stiffly in his chair, refusing to look at me. Leo was uncharacteristically quiet, sullen, and deflated. It was my mother who surprised me. When Dana slid the documents across the table, Richard crossed his arms, a stubborn child refusing his medicine. But Sarah, her face etched with a profound weariness, picked up the pen. Her hand trembled, but she signed her name with a grim finality. It was a quiet act of surrender, an acknowledgement that the game was over. Defeated, my father followed suit. I didn't kick them out. That would have been an act of vengeance, and I was beyond that. My actions were about justice and boundaries. Dana had already prepared the next document, a standard 6-month market rate lease agreement. I was now officially their landlord. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been completely and irrevocably inverted. From now on, any interaction we had would be on my terms, governed by the cold, clear language of a legal contract. 2 months later, James and I were married. The ceremony took place not at the historic inn, but in the backyard of my house, their old house. The symbolism was not lost on anyone. The grass was green, the afternoon sun was warm, and the guest list was small. It consisted of James's wonderful, supportive family, a dozen of our closest friends, and one guest of honor, Aunt Carol. She stood beside me, not as a replacement for my mother, but as a testament to the fact that family is not always about the blood you share, but about the respect you earn. There was no tension, no drama, no performance. There was just laughter, the clinking of champagne glasses, and a deep, abiding sense of peace. I looked at the faces surrounding me, people who were there to celebrate our love without condition, and I felt a lightness I hadn't known was possible. The empty spaces where my family should have been no longer felt like a void, but like breathing room. At the end of the 6-month lease, I put the house on the market. My parents pleaded with me to let them stay, but I held firm. The house was a monument to a life I was leaving behind. After the sale closed, I did one last thing. I had Dana wire a portion of the proceeds to my parents' account, enough for a security deposit and first month's rent on a small apartment. It was not an act of forgiveness. It was an act of finality, a severance package. It was the last dividend from my investment in the family, and with it, I was closing my account for good. James and I used the rest of the money to buy our own home, a lovely little place with a garden, miles away from the shadows of my past. It was a house with no history, but the one we were about to write ourselves. A year has passed. This morning I was drinking my coffee, a blend I chose in a mug I love, and looking out at my garden, where the first of the spring roses are beginning to bloom. The mail arrived, and in it was a birthday card from my parents. The message inside was stilted, formal. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of the past. There never will be. For a moment, I felt a familiar pang, a ghost of the grief for the family I wished I'd had. The scars are still there. They may never fade completely, but they no longer ache. They're just a part of my history, a reminder of the price I paid. But the pain is a quiet, manageable thing now, not the constant, crushing anxiety that once ruled my life. My peace is not defined by the absence of pain, but by the presence of choice. My choice. I put the card down and looked at a photo on our mantelpiece. It's from my wedding day. James and I are laughing, his arm around my waist, the sun in my hair. I look happy. I look free. I had to lose the family I was born in to find the one I was meant to have, and to finally, truly find myself. The cost was high, but as I stand here in the quiet of my own home, in the life that I have built, I know it was worth it. I have to ask, what price would you be willing to pay for your own peace?